You're listening to Quiet Horizons, a podcast of original science fiction stories written for the hours when the day is done. From here, there are no interruptions, just one complete story, beginning to end. Literary, unhurried, and best experienced with your eyes closed. Tonight's story begins now.
The Friday Gift. Part 1, The First Time. The first time it happened, Nora Callahan was 34 years old and had a hangover. This was relevant because the hangover was the reason she stayed in bed longer than usual on that particular Friday the 13th in January. And staying in bed longer than usual was the reason she was still horizontal and therefore not in a position to fall over when she opened her eyes and found herself not in her apartment in Columbus, but in the twin bed of her childhood bedroom in the house on Elm Creek Road in Denton, Texas, where she had not slept since she was 17. She lay very still. The ceiling above her was the ceiling she had stared at for 17 years. The particular off-white of old paint, the hairline crack that ran from the light fixture toward the window that her father had promised to fix every summer and never quite got to, the water stain in the corner shaped like a boot that she had named Gerald in the 4th grade for reasons she could no longer reconstruct. Gerald was still there. The crack was still there. The light fixture with the frosted glass shade was still there, and through it she could see the vague shapes of 2 dead moths that had been inside the glass for as long as she could remember. She sat up. The room was hers. Her room, the posters on the walls, the desk with the precarious textbook stack, the carpet that was blue in the middle and worn to gray at the door from 17 years of foot traffic in the same path between the bed and the hallway. The closet door was open, and inside it were the clothes of a person who was not yet 34, who was not yet 20, who was, she counted backward from the poster dates, from the textbook covers, from the particular phase of a boy band calendar on the wall, who was 16. She was 16 years old's Nora Callahan's bedroom, and she was 34 years old's Nora Callahan's mind, and the morning light through the window was the particular winter morning light of Texas in January, and from downstairs she could smell coffee and the specific scent of her mother's cooking, which was a smell she had not encountered in 17 years because her mother had died of a stroke in 2019. And this was apparently not 2019. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap and breathed. She was careful. She had no framework for what was happening, and so she defaulted to the approach she brought to all situations without frameworks, which was to gather information before acting, and to not do anything irreversible until she understood the situation better. She got up, she went to the desk and found the textbooks and confirmed the dates. January 2002, a Friday, which meant she was 16, and in the 2nd semester of her sophomore year of high school. She went to the mirror above the dresser and looked at herself. The face looking back was hers and not hers. Hers in the bone structure, in the particular arrangement of features she had carried her whole life, in the gray eyes that she had always been slightly self-conscious about because they were the kind of gray that photographed as colorless. But younger, the specific unfinished quality of 16, the face that had not yet arrived at itself, that was in the process of becoming what she would eventually be and had not finished the process. She put her hands on her cheeks. The face in the mirror put its hands on its cheeks. "Okay," she said out loud to the mirror. Her voice was her voice, but slightly higher. She heard footsteps on the stairs. The door opened without a knock, which was her mother's habit. Not out of disrespect, but because she had never fully accepted that her children's rooms were private in the way the children insisted they were. And her mother came in carrying a laundry basket and saying something about the dryer without looking up. Her mother, Ellen Callahan, in January 2002, was 53 years old, wearing the green chenille robe she wore every weekend morning. Her dark hair more silver than Nora remembered from this period. Her face, the face Nora had spent 3 years grieving, and then a further 2 years learning to remember clearly, rather than, in the distorted way, grief distorted things. She set the laundry basket on the foot of the bed and looked up. "You're already up," she said, with the mild surprise of someone whose 16-year-old daughter was not typically awake before 9 on a non-school day. "Yes," Nora said. Her mother looked at her. Ellen Callahan had the specific attentiveness of a woman who had raised 3 children and knew when something was off without being able to name what. She looked at Nora for a moment with that attentiveness and then said, "You all right?" "Yes," Nora said. "I'm fine. I'm good." Her mother held the look for another beat. Then she picked up the laundry basket. "Breakfast in 20 minutes," she said, and went back out. Nora sat on the desk chair and shook for a while, quietly, with her hands between her knees, because she was not going to cry in front of her mother when her mother was right there and alive and carrying laundry and asking if she was all right. She was not going to waste this on crying. She had one day. She understood this instinctively, with the kind of certainty that arrived without justification and turned out to be correct. One day. Whatever this was, whatever had happened, it had given her one day in January 2002, and the day would end, and she would either wake up back in her Columbus apartment, or she would discover that the situation was something other than temporary. She spent it with her mother. This required no particular strategy. Her mother was simply in the house, making breakfast, doing laundry, watching the Saturday morning news program she watched every weekend, puttering in the small ways that people puttered in their own homes, moving through the rooms of the day with the ordinary purposefulness of someone who had a list of things to do and was working through it. Nora followed her. She helped with breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table and talked about nothing in particular, school and a girl in her class and the book she was reading, ordinary conversation with no more weight than the day required. She was careful not to say anything that would alarm her mother or alter anything that she couldn't predict the consequences of. She didn't know what the rules were. She didn't know if this day could affect the future she had come from. She defaulted to presence, to being there, to sitting on the kitchen counter while her mother made soup for dinner and listening to her mother tell the story about the time she'd gotten lost driving to her college roommate's wedding, a story Nora had heard many times and had stopped hearing in the way you stopped hearing things you had heard too often, and which she was now hearing with the full attention of someone who understood that the number of times you could hear a thing was not infinite. In the afternoon, they watched a movie together on the couch, one of the romantic comedies her mother loved and Nora had always been slightly condescending about. Nora sat beside her and did not be condescending, and watched the movie, and laughed at the parts her mother laughed at, and was present in the specific, difficult, grateful way that she would not have known how to be at 16. At 9 p.m., she went upstairs and got into the twin bed and looked at Gerald the water stain, and the dead moths in the light fixture, and the crack in the ceiling. She woke up in Columbus with the hangover still waiting for her. She lay in her own bed for an hour. Then she got up and called her brother Danny in Dallas, who was 41, and who had been their mother's primary caretaker in the last 2 years before the stroke, who had his own grief that he managed in his own way. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" "Nothing," she said. Do you remember the soup Mom used to make? The tomato one with the basil?" A pause. "Yeah," he said. From the box, but she added stuff." "Half a can of coconut milk," Nora said. "And the fresh basil from the pot on the window." "How do you remember that?" "I was thinking about it," she said. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which was the right amount of time for a Saturday morning in January. When she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand and thought about what had happened, which she still had no explanation for, and about whether it would happen again. It happened again. Part 2. The Pattern. The second time was 3 months later, on a Friday the 13th, in April. She was more prepared. She had spent 3 months thinking about the January experience, turning it over, applying every rational framework she had, and finding each one insufficient, and eventually arriving at the position that rationality was not the right tool for this particular job, and that the better approach was empirical. Something happened on Friday the 13th. She didn't know why. She would observe carefully and see what she could learn. She woke up on an April morning in her junior year of high school, which was 2003, which was the year her father had lost his job at the plant, and the family had been managing a quiet, persistent financial stress that nobody talked about directly, but which Nora at 17 had understood and had navigated with the specific wariness of a teenager who knew the adults around her were worried. Her father was at the kitchen table when she came down. Ray Callahan in 2003 was 58 years old, heavier than she remembered him from her adult years, when he had taken up running after the heart scare in 2007 and had stayed thin for the rest of his life. He had the tired, inward look of a man who had been carrying something for several months without being able to put it down. He looked up when she came in. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. She poured coffee. She was old enough in this timeline to drink coffee, though her parents still occasionally commented on it. She sat down across from him. He went back to the newspaper. He did this with the slightly performative quality of someone who was reading in order to not have to talk, which she recognized now as the behavior of a man who was embarrassed about his situation and not sure how to be around his family in the middle of it. She watched him over the rim of her coffee cup. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was not sleeping well, which she now knew from her adult knowledge was because he was awake at 4 in the morning, doing the math of a household budget that didn't add up, a math problem that had no good solution at the moment, and that he was solving alone because he was from a generation that solved things alone. "Dad," she said. He looked up. She had thought about what to say, She had thought about it for 3 months without knowing when or where she would land, and she had a list in her mind of the things she could say to each of the people she might find herself with, distilled down to the true things that she had wanted to say and had not, or had not said well enough. I just want to say, she said, that I know things are hard right now, and I know you're handling it, and I think you're doing a good job. He looked at her. He had the expression of a man whose 17-year-old daughter had just said something he wasn't expecting. I mean it, she said. You're holding it together. It's going to be okay. A long pause. He set the newspaper down. He looked at his coffee cup. When he looked back up at her, his eyes were doing something she had not seen her father's eyes do when she was 17, which was filling, not crying, just filling. The way eyes did when a thing that had been held under pressure was suddenly given a small opening. Yeah, he said, it'll be okay. I know it will, she said. They drank their coffee in the morning, quiet, and her father's shoulders were slightly different after that. Not resolved, not fixed, but carried differently. The way a weight shifted is still a weight but sits easier. She spent the rest of the day ordinarily. She did homework that she had already done 20 years ago. She ate dinner with her family. She went to bed in the twin room and woke up in Columbus. She started keeping a journal. Not about the experiences, not in any detail that would read as evidence of instability if anyone found it. She kept it in the form of notes, spare and oblique, dates, and brief observations. January 13th, Mom, April. 13th, Dad. She wrote down what she had done, and what had seemed to matter, and what questions she still had. The questions were numerous. Why Friday the 13th, which was a superstition, not a physics? What selected the specific day she landed in, whether she was actually back in her past or in a very detailed simulation of it? Whether anything she did there changed the future she returned to, and if so, how she would know. Whether she should be trying harder to change things, or whether the not changing was protective. She answered none of these questions. She observed. The third Friday the 13th was in September, 9 months after the first. She woke up on a Tuesday in 1998, 12 years old, 6th grade. The autumn of the year her family had taken the camping trip to Big Bend that had been the best vacation of her childhood. She was certain of this, even before she went downstairs, and found the camping gear piled in the hallway, and her father on the phone, with the Park Service confirming the reservation. They drove 6 hours to Big Bend. She sat in the back seat with her brother Danny, who was 15 and going through his headphones in ignore everyone phase, and her sister Katie, who was 9 and had brought approximately 40 things to do in the car and was working through them with methodical cheerfulness. Her parents were in the front seat, her father driving with one hand on the wheel in the relaxed way he drove long distances, her mother with the map open, even though her father thought he knew the way and was mostly right. It was the best day she had in any of the Fridays. She was 12 and she was herself, and she was in Big Bend with her family on the way to the trip. She had remembered her whole life as uncomplicated and golden, and she sat in the back seat and watched the Texas landscape scroll past and let herself be 12 for the first time in 22 years. Part 3. The year of paying attention. By the end of the second year, she had been back 8 times. She had landed in her childhood 5 times, and in her 20s 3 times. The childhood visits distributed across ages 9 through 16. The 20s visits were more varied. A day in college, a day during her first year in Columbus, a day she recognized as the weekend she had met her ex-husband Daniel, which she had not known what to do with and had spent largely in a state of heightened alertness. The Daniel day was the first one that raised the question seriously. She'd been 28 when she met him, at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Columbus, and they had been together for 4 years and married for 2, and then not married for 2 more. In the way of endings that were not dramatic but were definitive, the slow subsidence of a relationship that had been wrong in ways that took time to become visible. The divorce had been one of the harder experiences of her life, not because she had still been in love with him at the end, she hadn't entirely, but because she had been in love with the idea of the life she had expected to have with him, and losing an expected life was its own specific grief. She woke up on a Saturday in June at 28 and recognized it within the first 20 minutes as the housewarming party day, and spent an hour in the apartment she had lived in that year, thinking about what to do. She could not meet him differently. She could not change the conversation, the attraction, the beginning of it. She could not know, standing at 28 with the knowledge of 34, whether the relationship had been wrong from the start, or had been right and become wrong, and whether the wrongness had been specific to Daniel, or to something in herself that would have applied to whoever she had met that year. She could not change the day in any consequential way without consequences she couldn't predict. She went to the party. She met Daniel. She had the same conversation she remembered having, or something close enough to it, and she watched herself be 28 and hopeful about him and felt, Not regret exactly, but the complicated tenderness of seeing yourself before you knew how something ended. She came home to 2016, not to 2046, and found the apartment as she'd left it and the question of the Fridays still unanswered, and herself no more certain about the rules than she'd been the first time. She called her friend Priya, who was the only person she had told about the Fridays, partly because Priya was a psychiatrist and Nora had wanted a professional assessment of whether this was a symptom, and partly because Priya was the most rigorous thinker she knew. Priya had listened to the full account and been quiet for a moment and then said, "What would change your interpretation of this as real versus not real?" "I don't know," Nora said. "That's the problem," Priya said. "Both hypotheses are consistent with the available evidence. So you should probably stop spending energy on the question of which it is and spend it on the question of what you want to do with it." "What do I want to do with it?" Nora repeated. "You've been going back and having careful, low-impact days," Priya said. "You had the conversation with your dad, and you watched your mom make soup. You've been treating it like a museum, a place you visit and don't touch things." "Because I don't know what touching things does." "Right," Priya said, "but you're also not getting any information from the not touching. You're preserving a status quo that you can't verify is worth preserving." Nora thought about this. "What do you want from it?" Priya said. "If you could want anything." She thought about it honestly. "I want to fix the things I got wrong," she said. "Which things?" The list was not short. Part 4, The Changes. She started small. The October Friday the 13th of her second year landed her in a Wednesday in 1999. 13 years old, 8th grade, a day she recognized by the combination of context clues as the day she had said something cruel to a girl named Melissa Hooper in the hallway between 4th and 5th period, and had known immediately it was cruel, and had not apologized because she had been 13. An apology had felt like weakness. She had thought about Melissa Hooper a surprising number of times in the intervening 21 years. Not constantly. Not with the acute guilt of a serious wrong, but with the low-grade, persistent discomfort of a small unkindness that had never been addressed. The kind of thing that surfaced at random intervals in the shower in the moments before sleep, because the conscience kept the ledger even when the conscious mind had moved on. She found Melissa in the hallway after 4th period. She said, "Hey, I wanted to say I'm sorry about what I said last week. It was mean, and I didn't mean it." Melissa looked at her with the wariness of a 13-year-old who had been on the receiving end of a great deal and was uncertain about the status of this new development. Then she said carefully, "Okay, I mean it," Nora said. "Okay," Melissa said again, but differently this time. They were not friends after that, in this day or in any version of history Nora could access. But Melissa's shoulders dropped slightly as she walked away, and Nora felt, for the rest of the day, the specific lightness of a thing set down. She came home to Columbus in the apartment and the journal on the nightstand and added a line. "Melissa, done." The big ones were harder. She thought for 2 years about her grandmother, her father's mother, Helen Callahan, who had died in 2011 at 92 after a life that had generated, toward the end of it, a family argument of the kind that long-lived families generated, about care and money and who was doing how much and who was not doing enough, and in the course of which Nora had said things to her father about his management of the situation that she had never fully retracted, and that had sat in the space between them for 2 years, until the argument's details were subsumed in the grief of Helen's death, and then further subsumed in the ordinary continued life of a family that loved each other and managed around its hard places. She had not apologized to her father for the argument. She had wanted to, many times. It had not happened in the way that necessary things sometimes didn't happen, not through unwillingness, but through the accumulation of ordinary life, each day presenting its own priorities, the apology always being the thing that could happen tomorrow. She landed on a Friday in 2010, November, the year before Helen died, and her father was at Thanksgiving at the Columbus apartment. She had had the apartment since 2006, had hosted Thanksgiving since 2008, when she had reached the age at which hosting felt like the right thing to do. He was in the kitchen with her, helping with the cranberry sauce, which was a dish he had always claimed as his department, and they were talking about Helen and the nursing home and the logistics of the situation. And Nora said, "Dad, I want to say something about last year, about the argument." He looked up from the cranberries. "I said things that weren't fair," she said, "about how you were handling it. I didn't know enough about what it was actually like, and I was frustrated, and I said things that weren't fair, and I'm sorry." He held the wooden spoon still over the pot. "I should have said it sooner," she said. He looked at the cranberries for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't handle all of it well either." I know, but that's on you. This is on me. He stirred the cranberries. His jaw worked slightly, the expression he made when he was processing something. Then he said, "Thank you, Nora." Not Ray Callahan's customary response to anything. He was not a man who said thank you easily for things in the emotional register. The fact of it, the plainness of it, sat in the kitchen with them while the cranberries bubbled. She came back to Columbus 3 years later than the day she'd left. By the apartment's accumulated evidence, new furniture, different plants, the small reorganizations of a space over time. She sat on the couch and looked at the room she had been living in without living in, and felt the odd double quality of it. The day that had happened in 2010, which she now remembered, alongside the day she had returned from, which she did not fully remember because she had not been there to remember it. She called her father. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hey, Dad, how are you?" "Good," he said. "How are you?" "Good," she said. "I was just thinking about Thanksgiving." "Which one?" "The cranberry sauce one," she said. "The year we had the conversation." A pause. "Yeah," he said. "That was a good Thanksgiving." She did not know if his memory of it was the same as hers. She could not verify this. She held it as a data point. It had happened, she had said the thing, it had been received, and whatever the downstream of it had been, it had apparently been good enough that her father remembered the Thanksgiving as good. She went to bed thinking about what else she had to say and to whom. Part 5. The mistakes. Not all of it went well. She had understood this was possible and had been careful, and the care had protected her from catastrophe, but not from the smaller failures that came from overconfidence about what she understood. She landed in a Sunday in 2005 that she recognized, within the first minutes of being awake, as a day in the summer before her senior year of college. She was 20 years old and living in a house off campus with 3 roommates and a collective good time that had been one of the best summers of her life. She also recognized it after the first cup of coffee and a walk through the house, as the day before she had made the choice that had defined the direction of her early career. The day before she had called the firm in Atlanta to decline the offer that she had subsequently spent 3 years second-guessing, choosing instead to stay in Columbus for reasons she no longer fully remembered, but which had had something to do with a person, and something to do with inertia, and something to do with the specific difficulty of leaving a place you had become comfortable in. She had thought about the Atlanta job approximately twice a year for the following 14 years. She had built a good career in Columbus in marketing strategy, work that she was good at and that paid well and that she had no serious complaints about. But the Atlanta job had been in urban planning, which was what she had studied, which was the discipline she had loved, in a direct and uncomplicated way that she had never quite felt about marketing strategy. She had chosen comfort over direction, and the choice had calcified, and the direction had become unreachable in the ordinary way of roads not taken. She called the Atlanta firm back. She told them she had changed her mind. She told them she was accepting the offer. She hung up feeling the specific rightness of a correct decision, the alignment of intention and action, and spent the rest of the day with the calm of someone who had settled something that had needed settling. She came back to Columbus. She came back to an apartment she did not recognize, not completely. The bones of it were familiar, the layout, the windows, the radiator under the window that made noise in winter. But the furniture was different. The books on the shelves were different. The photographs on the desk were different. And she looked at them carefully and found herself in them, but in different contexts. Other cities, other people, faces she didn't recognize alongside her own. Her phone was on the nightstand. She picked it up. Columbus area code, same number. But the contacts list was reorganized, and several names she expected were absent, and several she didn't recognize were present, and the email inbox showed an address she knew, and a professional history she didn't. She had made a different choice in 2005, and the different choice had made a different life, and the different life had made a different apartment, and the person who lived here was her, but not the her she had been when she went to sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She was a stranger in her own apartment. The version of herself who had taken the Atlanta job had a life here in Columbus, which meant the Atlanta job had eventually come back to Columbus, or had been a step on a path that returned, or had simply not led where she had imagined. The urban planning she had loved at 20 had apparently become something in this version, because the bookshelf had professional texts she didn't remember owning, and the desk had a portfolio case that she opened and found plans. Actual plans, building plans, urban design documents, her name in the title block. She had spent 14 years mourning a direction, and the direction, in the version where she had taken it, had led here, to the same city, to the same apartment, more or less, to a different bookshelf, and a portfolio case on the desk. She could not tell from inside this day whether this version was better or worse. The photographs showed a life that looked good, that showed her in places she had not been, and with expressions she recognized as genuinely happy, but you could not read a whole life from photographs. You could not know from the portfolio case whether the work was satisfying or whether the apartment held loneliness or ease or both in the proportions that mattered. She spent the day carefully, making no calls, consulting no one, reading the evidence of this version of herself with the detached thoroughness of an archivist handling unfamiliar material. When she went to sleep, she woke up in Columbus. Her Columbus, the apartment she knew. She lay in her familiar bed and looked at the familiar ceiling and felt for the first time the weight of what she was doing. She called Priya. "The Atlanta thing," she said when Priya answered. "What about it?" "I tried to change it. I called them back and accepted." "And?" "Different apartment, different life. Good, I think. Different." Priya was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," Nora said. "I feel like I've been assuming I know what better looks like, and I'm not sure I do." "What does better look like?" Priya said. "In your version?" She looked at her apartment, the books she had chosen, the furniture she had found, the accumulated evidence of 17 years of the life she had made in this city, the career and marketing strategy that she was good at, that had problems and satisfactions, and a set of colleagues she cared about, and a client relationship she had built over 6 years that she was genuinely proud of. The apartment itself, which she knew the way you knew a place after a long time, which was in the specific tactile way of every sound and every light and every place where the floor creaked. "My version," she said slowly, "has things in it that the other version doesn't. I can't know what the other version has that mine doesn't." "No," Priya said, "you can't. So I can't optimize it." "No one can optimize a life," Priya said. "You can only live it in one direction." Nora was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think I've been treating the Fridays like a repair job, like there's a correct version of my life and I'm trying to find it." "And now?" "And now I think that's wrong," she said. "I think the correct version is the one I'm in, and the Fridays are for something else." "What?" Priya said. She thought about her mother making soup, and her father with the cranberries, and Melissa Hooper's shoulders dropping in the hallway, and 12-year-old Nora in the back seat watching Texas go past. "They're for being present," she said, "with the people, not for fixing the choices, but for being there in the way I wasn't when it was happening, because I didn't know how yet." Priya was quiet for a moment. "That seems right," she said. "That seems like a better use of them." Part 6. Grace. She was 41 now. She had been experiencing the Fridays for 7 years. Not every Friday the 13th. There were years with only one, years with two, once a year with three that had exhausted her in a way that took weeks to recover from. The total count was 23. She had been to her childhood 11 times, her 20s 8 times, her 30s 4 times. The 30s visits had been the strangest. Returning to a time she remembered clearly, finding herself in days she could identify with confidence, experiencing them with the awareness of someone who had been further along than this and come back. She had been 31 once, and 33 twice, and 35 once, and the 35 one had been last year, which meant she had visited herself 6 years ago, and the experience of watching herself at 35 with the perspective of 41 was humbling in a specific way. She had been so certain at 35 of the job, of the apartment, of the shape of her life, of the particular clarity she had convinced herself she had achieved, and she had at 41 enough distance to see the certainty for what it was, not wisdom, not really, but confidence, which was a different thing and which was necessary, but was not the same as knowing. She had sat across from her 35-year-old self at the kitchen table, having a coffee, and had resisted the urge to say anything useful. She did not tell her anything about the next 6 years. She did not drop hints or leave signposts. She simply had a cup of coffee and talked about the book she was reading and felt the warmth of her own company, which was an experience she had no adequate words for. The day she wanted to write about, the one she had been turning over for months, was not a dramatic day. It was a Tuesday in 2003, 17 years old, late October, a school day. She had landed in it and oriented herself and gone downstairs and found her mother at the kitchen table with the bills spread in front of her, doing the household accounting. That was her task, and that she did with the systematic focus of a woman who had learned to make numbers work by will when they did not want to. The October light was coming through the kitchen window at the low angle of late fall, and her mother was in reading glasses she had recently started wearing and had not yet fully accepted as necessary. Nora made 2 cups of coffee and set one at her mother's elbow and sat down across from her. Her mother looked up. "You made coffee?" "Yes." "Why are you up this early?" "I wanted to sit with you," Nora said. Her mother looked at her. The reading glasses were on the end of her nose, and over them she had the full attention that Nora had been seeing for 23 Fridays now. the specific quality of Ellen Callahan's notice. Sit with me, she said. Yes, Nora said. Her mother looked at her for a moment longer. Then she took off the reading glasses and set them on the bill stack and picked up the coffee cup. Okay, she said. They sat in the October morning with the light coming in and the bills waiting, and no particular agenda. Her mother talked about the garden, which was in its late season state. The tomatoes finished, the last of the peppers, the rosemary still going because rosemary went forever. She talked about a book she was reading. She talked about Danny, who was in college in Austin, and calling home less than Ellen would have liked, and more than she would admit she liked. She talked about a neighbor and a church committee and a fundraiser she was organizing, and the particular political situation in the school board that had been simmering for months. Nora listened. She listened with the complete attention she had been developing over 7 years of these mornings, the attention that did not plan its response while the other person was speaking, that did not move ahead to what came next, that received what was being said in the full present tense of it. Her mother wound down after a while and picked up the reading glasses and said, "What about you? How are you?" "Good," Nora said. "Really good." "School?" "Fine. It's fine." Her mother looked at her over the glasses. "You seem settled," she said. "You seem like you've settled something." "Maybe," Nora said. "Good," her mother said, and went back to the bills. Nora sat with her coffee and the October light and her mother's presence at the kitchen table and let herself have it, the ordinariness of it, the specific warmth of a Tuesday morning in a house where everyone was alive and the rosemary was going forever in the garden and the bills would get paid because they always got paid in the end, and the coffee was good. She was 41 years old in a 17-year-old body, and she was having coffee with her mother on an October Tuesday. And this was the thing. Not the dramatic conversations, not the apologies or the course corrections, or the explorations of alternate choices. This, the morning, the company, the unremarkable, irreplaceable, unrecoverable fact of a Tuesday with someone you loved. Part 7, the Friday she understood. She was 43 on the Friday that clarified it. She woke up on a morning in 2001, 15 years old, spring, a day she did not immediately recognize, which was unusual. She had generally been able to identify her landing days within the first few minutes. She lay in the twin bed and looked at Gerald and the dead moths and tried to place it. She got up and looked at the desk calendar. April 3rd, a Saturday, nothing marked. She went downstairs. Her father was at the kitchen table with the newspaper, and her mother was in the garden, visible through the kitchen window, in the particular planting crouch she adopted in spring, moving along the beds with her trowel. Danny was not visible, which meant he was at his friend's house or sleeping in. Katie was on the living room floor with a coloring book and the focused silence of a 7-year-old engaged with something that required all of her. Nora got coffee and went and sat in the living room with Katie. "What are you coloring?" she said. "A horse," Katie said without looking up. "I'm making it purple." "Horses aren't purple," Nora said, and then caught herself, because she had been 15 when she said that, and she was not actually 15, and she knew better. But Katie said, with the absolute confidence of a 7-year-old artist, "This one is." "Fair," Nora said. She sat on the floor beside her sister. Katie colored with the focused intensity she had brought to everything she cared about, which in adulthood had become the focused intensity of a teacher in Phoenix who had spent 18 years helping children learn to read and who was, by all accounts, extraordinarily good at it. But right now she was 7 and coloring a purple horse, and the morning was coming in through the living room windows, and the house had the particular weekend morning quality of a house, with people in it who were not in a hurry. Nora had not landed in a day with Katie often. Most of her visits had found her in conversation with her parents. Her parents had been the primary object of her attention, for the obvious reasons, the reasons of finitude. But Katie was here, alive and 7, and coloring. And Nora was 43 and her sister was 35. And they had the functional but slightly distant relationship of adult siblings who lived in different cities and spoke at holidays and shared family news but did not particularly know each other. This had been something Nora had noticed and not done much about. Katie was the one who had stayed in Texas, who had married and put down roots and built her life close to where they had grown up. And Nora had moved to Columbus and built a different shape of life, and the distance was not unfriendly, but it was real. She had not thought of Katie as someone she needed to fix anything with. There was nothing broken, there was just distance. She picked up a crayon from Katie's pile. "Blue. Can I color something?" she said. Katie looked at the page and then at her with the assessing eye of an artist being asked to share her canvas. Then she turned the coloring book toward Nora and pointed at a section of background, a patch of meadow that she had not yet gotten to. "You can do that part," she said, "but try to stay in the lines." "I'll do my best," Nora said. They colored for an hour, Katie talked in the rambling associative way of 7-year-olds about her horse and her class at school, and a friend and a game she had invented, and a dream she'd had about a talking fish. Nora listened and colored the meadow blue, and then, at Katie's insistence, added some green. The conversation required nothing from her except presence. Not wisdom, not maturity, not the careful adult attention she had been developing. Just being there on the floor with the coloring book and the crayons and the morning coming in. When they were done, Katie looked at the finished page and said, "The meadow is too blue." "I know," Nora said. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," Katie said. "It's more interesting." Nora looked at the blue meadow and the purple horse and the October light that was actually April light, but the same quality, the same angle, the same kind of morning. She understood something sitting there. It was not a revelation in the dramatic sense. It did not arrive with weight or urgency. It arrived the way things arrived when you had been working toward them for a long time without knowing it, which was quietly, already true, waiting to be noticed. The Fridays were not a correction mechanism. They were not a gift for fixing what was broken or retrieving what was lost, or trying, from the vantage of later knowledge, to make the past into something better than it had been. She had been trying that in various ways for 8 years, and it had produced the cranberry sauce conversation and the Melissa apology and the Atlanta experiment that had shown her the unknowability of alternate paths, and all of those things had been worth doing, but none of them were the point. The point was this: a Saturday morning on the floor with her sister and the purple horse and the blue meadow, and no agenda except the morning itself. And the point was that she kept getting chances to be present, to be really present, in the way she had not been at 15 or at 23 or at 31, because presence was a skill and she had not had it yet in the days she had already lived but could live again with better equipment. Not to fix them, not to redirect them, to have them fully in the way they deserved to be had. She had been so focused on what the Fridays could correct that she had nearly missed what they were offering, which was something simpler and larger both: more time. More time with the people she loved, in the ordinary days that were the substance of a life, the days that felt like gaps between the important things and were in fact the important things. She put her arm around Katie's 7-year-old shoulder and looked at the purple horse. "It's a good horse," she said. "I know," Katie said. Epilogue 47. She was 47 now. The Fridays had been happening for 13 years. She had been back 31 times. She had been to her childhood 16 times, and her 20s 9 times, and her 30s 6 times. The oldest she had visited was 39, which was 4 years ago. She did not know if the Fridays would take her there eventually, to the years she was living now, and she had stopped trying to predict where she would land, and had started simply being ready. Being ready meant something specific to her now. It meant she kept a particular quality of attention available at all times. Not a vigilance, not an anxious monitoring, but an openness, the preparedness of a person who knew that any ordinary day might be the one she came back to, and who therefore tried to be worth coming back to. This had, over 13 years, changed the way she lived. She called Katie on the first Sunday of every month. Not because of any Friday she had spent with Katie, she had only landed in a day with her sister twice, but because the Fridays had taught her that the floor and the purple horse and the morning coming in were the things, and she wanted more of them while they were currently happening, while Katie was alive and in Phoenix, and there was nothing between them and a phone call except the choice to make one. She had gone back to visit her father in Texas 6 times in the past 3 years. Ray Callahan was 82 and well for his age, and still made the cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving, and she sat in the kitchen while he made it and talked about nothing in particular, and did not take the time for granted. She had become, her colleagues told her, a better listener. She was not sure this was the Fridays exactly, or not the Fridays alone. She thought it was the accumulated effect of 31 practice days in which listening had been the entire skill required, in which all she could do was be there and receive what the day was giving her. The practice had transferred. She was better at it in her own present, in the life she was living forward, in the meetings and dinners and phone calls and ordinary Tuesdays that were the structure of her days. She had not tried to change anything significant since the Atlanta experiment. She had had 11 conversations she had been needing to have. She had made 6 apologies. She had spent an afternoon with her father's mother, Helen, who had died in 2011, gardening in the backyard of the Denton house, not saying anything important, just gardening. She had gone to one of her own concerts. She had played piano for 6 years as a teenager and quit at 17, and she had gone to her 14-year-old recital and sat in the folding chairs of the school auditorium and listened to herself play, and had been, against all expectation, moved by it, by the effort in it, by the concentration on the young face turned toward the keys. She had not tried to be better at the recital. She had watched and let it be what it was. The most recent Friday had been in November. She had woken up on a Monday in 2008, 22 years old, her first year in Columbus, the year she had been lonely and had not known how to be lonely without it meaning something was wrong with her. She had been in a studio apartment downtown and had not yet found her people, and had been working at her first job in marketing and coming home every evening to the studio and cooking dinner alone and going to bed. She had hated that year at the time. It had felt like failure. She went back to it and she cooked dinner in the studio and she ate it alone at the small table by the window and looked out at Columbus in November. And she was 22 and lonely in the way of a person who had not yet found her life. And she sat with it. She did not fix it. She sat with the 22-year-old version of herself that was also herself in the small apartment in the November evening. And she let the loneliness be what it had been, which was difficult and also survivable, which was the year before the year she had met Priya at a work event and made the friendship that had been one of the defining ones of her life, which was the year before she had found the apartment she would eventually stay in, which was the year before the city had started to feel like hers. She had been so impatient with that year while she was in it. She had wanted it to be over, wanted it to skip forward to the part where she belonged somewhere. She ate the dinner and looked out the window and thought, I made it through. The me that is eating this dinner made it through, and I am the proof of it. She felt, in the studio apartment in November 2008, an uncomplicated love for the 22-year-old sitting at the table, for her impatience and her loneliness and her not yet knowing, and the specific courage it took to keep getting up and going to the job and cooking the dinner alone, and believing, without evidence, that the through was reachable. She came home to 47 and made coffee, and stood at the window of the apartment she had been in for 18 years, the city outside that had been hers for a long time now. And she was grateful, in the specific way of a person who knew, from experience rather than faith, that the difficult years were not failures. They were the years. They were the substance of it, like all the others. The next Friday the 13th was in January. She did not know where she would go. She was not trying to predict it. She kept the space available, the openness, the readiness, the quality of attention that had taken her 13 years to develop, and that she was still, she thought, improving. She kept it available, and she lived her life forward in the meantime, in the only direction that worked, with the knowledge she had gathered, and the practice she had built, and the specific tenderness she had developed for the ordinary days that were, it turned out, the whole of it: the purple horse, the cranberry sauce, the October mornings, and the dead moths in the light fixture, and Gerald the water stain, and her mother's hand with the trowel, moving along the beds. She kept the space available. She was ready. End. As we reach the end of tonight's journey, I hope these quiet horizons have brought you a deep sense of peace and calm. Let your body grow heavy, your breathing slow and steady, and your mind drift gently into rest. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and I'll see you again on the next horizon.